You know, I've covered plenty of fighting games over the years, ranging from titles that everyone and their grandmother has played, to more obscure games that never received the attention they deserved, with Street Fighter 4 sitting confidently next to the big dogs. First released in arcades nearly 20 years ago, this is undoubtedly the fighting game I spent the most time with as a kid, even more so than my beloved Marvel vs. Capcom 3. I even bought its soundtrack CD, and will never tire of reading through the numerous typos in the booklet. Now that I'm older and can think about topics more critically, I wanted to revisit vanilla Street Fighter 4 specifically and explore why it ended up being one of the most successful fighters in recent memory. I have a lot of childhood nostalgia for this game, man, and even after all these years, it still takes me back to when I was a little kid who had no idea how to throw out a fireball. With the preamble out of the way, get ready to FADC into Ultra as we explore 2009 Street Fighter 4. If you're one of the many players who have been stabbed in an arcade after throwing someone too many times, then you'll be intimately familiar with Street Fighter's rapid popularity throughout the 90s. Street Fighter 2 cabinets across America were making millions of dollars, and Japan was even hosting tournaments with cosplayers and musical acts. That's how big Street Fighter was during the early to mid-90s. However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, as I'm sure you've heard the phrase "what goes up must come down," and this perfectly describes the series' popularity in the late 90s. Due to market oversaturation, fierce competition, and a whole host of other factors, Street Fighter 3 New Generation was a colossal failure. There's a fantastic article covering the whole debacle on Polygon, and series artist Akira Yasuda is quoted as wishing he never worked on the game at all. This dramatic collapse of sales figures led to Capcom believing the Street Fighter IP wasn't worth investing in anymore, as aside from smaller scale titles released through the early 2000s, there were no new mainline entries being released. Enter Yoshinori Ono, a Capcom employee who had worked on audio for games like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, Spawn, In the Demon's Hand, and Devil May Cry. After traveling the world and hearing from passionate fans who yearned for a series continuation, he made it his mission to convince Mega Man creator and head of Capcom's R&D, Keiji Inafune, to greenlight a potential Street Fighter 4. In an extensive EGM article detailing the game, Ono states, "From the beginning, the prevailing attitude at Capcom had been that there would never be a Street Fighter 4. Everyone had given up on the idea because too much time had passed since SF3, and everyone at Capcom seemed perfectly okay with letting it end. Let's get this straight, getting this game made hasn't been an easy process within Capcom. There was certainly resistance at first, but the more interaction I had with fans at conventions, the more I realized that gamers desperately expected this to happen, and that Capcom had to do it." Following Ono's persistent calls to action, Inafune relented, and pre-production on Street Fighter 4 began in 2005, before being officially announced at a London press event in 2007. As a sort of test to gauge series interest, Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting was released digitally via Xbox Live Arcade in mid-2006, with Ono using this to further fuel his ambitious development concepts. If you look at Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting on XBLA, it may not be the highest quality product, but the fact that it sold so well despite that proves that a lot of people are still really into this series. I don't feel that the brand is dead in the US. If anything, it's like a sleeping giant, but we want to kick him in the ribs and wake him up. Kick him in the ribs they did, but only after burning through countless prototypes. Screenshots taken from the game's alpha builds depict a very early Ryu character model, and he kind of looks like an action figure. We can see multiple bars of meter, a stun gauge, and Ryu's universal overhead from Street Fighter 3, indicating that this build was making great use of Third Strike as a reference. A later prototype switched to a completely different camera angle, one that made Street Fighter 4 look like a 3D fighter. Speaking of which, a Destructoid article from 2010 explains that the game's hitboxes and hurtboxes were originally only found specifically on character models, much like how Mortal Kombat X handles its hit detection, but this was changed after negative feedback from playtesters. Video interviews with Ono feature beta build footage, and like with the previous screenshots, there are major differences when compared to the final game. The Ultra meter was found attached to the health bars at the top of the screen, the Super meter on the bottom of the screen is a HD version of Third Strike's meters, and the UI's font is different too. If we skip forward a bit, a character select screen can be found in the background, one that features early character artwork. No matter what form the game took during development, Ono's vision was crystal clear. With SF4, I think it's important to look back at SF2 and see what players enjoyed about that game. We want it to feel like a homecoming, for it to be natural and instinctive for users to return to. We realize that people still love SF2 and see it as the pinnacle of fighters. We want to respect that legacy. There's a seemingly infinite number of other quotes I could pull from this EGM article, but I think the point is clear. Capcom's primary goal was to satisfy the wishes of those who loved Street Fighter 2 back in the day. And boy did they succeed, because the hype surrounding Street Fighter 4 was next level. Before it was even released on consoles in 2009, a 90-minute documentary was created by American FGC members to express their love for the scene and the game, as well as the iconic video of the two guys driving down the road.
Street Fighter 4! Street Fighter 4! Street Fighter 4!
Grown men were brought to primal screams of Street Fighter 4! Street Fighter 4! Blah, blah, blah. That's how excited they were. Even I remember being excited for the game when I was around 4 or maybe 5 years old. I would see the old black and orange Street Fighter 4 posters plastered around a shopping center I'd attend with my parents, and I can't stress enough that they were everywhere. No matter which floor you were on, there were Street Fighter 4 posters. However, none of this was part of an early pitch for the game, one formulated by Super Turbo HD Remix designer David Sirlin. Dubbed Street Fighter 4 FLASHBACK, the titular mechanic would allow players to reverse time in matches, and the game would even contain a single-player story mode called World Tour. I think I may have heard that before somewhere. The original concept document has survived online, and if you would like to read through it, I'll leave a link in the description. Trust me, there's some amazing stuff in here. Unfortunately for Sirlin, Capcom passed on his idea and opted to create the game in-house alongside Dimps, the studio behind the Rumblefish 2 and Sonic Rush. What a portfolio. With a 3-year development cycle, tons of support from fans, and rising pressure on the back of Yoshinori Ono, how did Street Fighter 4's gameplay systems turn out? As Capcom's goal was to evoke that 1990s nostalgia from old-school Street Fighter fans, Street Fighter 4 feels more like an updated version of SF2 with some Third Strike mannerisms thrown in. Along with Super Turbo's World Warriors, with the exception of DJ and T-Hawk, the classic 6-button layout returns, along with all the basic game mechanics you remembered from back in the day. Think chains, links, stuns, anti-airs, meter management, and that sort of stuff. Before you even take the brand new system mechanics into consideration, that core concept of footsies and controlling space in neutral is what defines Street Fighter 4's gameplay loop, and players who have mastered the fundamentals of 2D fighting games will feel right at home within moments of selecting a character. Because of how the archetypes and unique attacks of each fighter have remained consistent, those with prior knowledge can easily pick up from where they left off. For example, if you are a Zangief loyalist in Super Turbo or Alpha 3, his game plan of closing distance and forcing the enemy to scramble as they fear his command grab hasn't changed at all. The same phenomenon applies to the other returning fighters, which was a deliberate design choice from Capcom. Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel by fundamentally changing what players expect from Street Fighter, they opted to keep the foundation they built throughout the 90s and just expand on it with new characters and mechanics. Speaking of which, focus attacks are single-hitting strikes that were introduced to provide players with creative offensive and defensive capabilities. Executed by holding both medium attacks, level 1 focus attacks do minor damage and usually leave you minus on block. I believe the frame data for each character after a forward dash is different, but it's a good idea to not be left open like this. Level 2 is when you slightly charge up the focus attack, and it leads to a crumple state on hit. Level 3 is charged all the way, with the crumple becoming unblockable. As each version has one hit of armor, you can use focus to absorb incoming attacks while advancing forward, converting part of your life bar into recoverable health. This can quickly add up in mere seconds, with one hit being all it takes to deal huge damage if you aren't careful. Additionally, 2 bars of meter is what it takes to cancel a move into a focus attack. Since you can cancel focuses into forward dashes, you can effectively forward dash out of attacks, better known as the Focus Attack Dash Cancel, or FADC for short. Ryu's infamous DP, FADC Ultra 1 combo stems from this maneuver, and many other characters can make effective use of this too. Not all focus attacks were made equal, however, as their distinctive animations influence their range, with some of them reaching way farther than others. Third Strike's Super Select system has also been given the boot, as characters now only have one super combo, just like in Super Turbo. Unlike that game where meter was only used for supers, EX moves and FADCs will hog your meter, so don't expect to be throwing many of these out. Conversely, ultra combos will happen all the time, as the revenge meter, as well as its lovely fire green screen asset, builds up as you take damage. A general rule of thumb is that the more ultra meter you have, the more damage these cinematic supers will do, and their usage is wildly different. Ryu's is great for all-rounder purposes, Rose's is a punishment tool, Guile's is an anti-air, and Vega's one barely works, just for some examples. With how much damage ultra combos do, and with how easily you can combo into some of them, they're clearly designed to be a sort of comeback mechanic. Remember how I said before that focus attack absorption gives you grey life? Well, since you're technically taking damage, the ultra meter fills up, allowing you to have full meter without ever truly taking a hit. If an enemy is continuously zoning, you can intentionally focus through singular fireballs to build ultra meter, but watch out for multi-hitting ones. These mechanics are great and all, but the character roster is truly the star of the show. Taking heavy inspiration from Super Turbo and Alpha 2, it functions as a celebration of the olden days where you would play Street Fighter with friends at the convenience store or at home on the Super Nintendo. It very much feels like a direct sequel to Street Fighter 2, even with 5 newcomers sprinkled in to keep things fresh. Abel, C. Viper, Rufus, Alforte, and Seth all look, sound, and function completely differently. But with the exception of Crimson Viper and her neuron-activating business suit, they've never been particularly beloved, I'll say that. If you've been around the online Street Fighter community, then you've most likely heard complaints about Abel's flat personality, Rufus's grotesque appearance, and Alforte's ADHD movement patterns, among other not-so-kind words. It's not all negative though, as plenty of competitors around the globe proved just how effective these fighters can be when played to perfection. As a side note, if you would like to hear more about these newcomers in detail, I have a video covering exactly that, so consider checking it out if you're interested. Before we move on, it would be criminal if I ignored some of the odd balancing choices that Capcom made, intentionally or otherwise, during development. Vanilla Akuma dominated just about every fighter in the game with his insane damage output and screen control, and Sagat had easy combos that would vanquish life bars in the blink of an eye. Ryu was also an amazing all-rounder character with high damage, and Seth was very strong too, if you can look past his extremely low health. We'll never know how Vanilla's balancing played out in the long term due to Super Street Fighter 4 releasing a year later, but I assume that many of the perceived lower tiers would have worked their way up the food chain as players improved. What it all boils down to is that if you were a casual player who just wanted to pick your favorite karate man and throw fireballs, you could do that with no issues whatsoever, whereas their competitive crowd could get lost in the world of frame data, set play, focus attacks, etc. Both crowds approached Street Fighter 4 with vastly different mindsets, but thanks to its confident blend of classic and modern game design, they were equally satisfied. Ignoring Ryu's deep gaze as he longs into the smoky pits of your soul, if you look left, you'll notice a bunch of modes to play around with, and these make up a bulk of Street Fighter 4's content. For simplicity's sake, we'll go in order, and I don't know about you, but this is kind of starting to creep me out. Arcade mode is your standard fighting game affair. Select a character, fight a series of CPU-controlled opponents, and finish off by defeating Seth, the final boss. Every fighter has an intro and outro cutscene that explains their motivations for participating in the World Warrior Tournament, and even though I loved watching these as a kid, I now see just how wonky their animation is. Don't get me wrong, I'm far from an artist and I can barely draw a stick figure to save my life, but Animation Studio 4 Degrees has seen better days. What is that? On a lighter note, meeting certain requirements during an arcade mode run is how you'll challenge one of 2 secret final bosses, Shin Akuma or Boss Goken. This is an intentional harkening back to the Akuma fight in Super Turbo, and being jump-scared by the sudden brushstroke animation always got me hyped as a kid. Arcade mode isn't doing anything unique per se, but it gets the job done overall, so I can't really complain. Versus mode is where you can freely battle another player, the CPU, or watch 2 CPU characters battle it out. I've gotta say, any fighting game that lets me record B-roll footage while I go to the bathroom gets an A+ in my book. Look how much work I'm putting in! Jokes aside, your options here regarding gameplay changes are limited, as aside from a handicap system that impacts how much health you have, it's all relatively straightforward. Xbox Live Battle is where you can get your punches in over the internet, but as I have a modded system with a downloaded save file, I can't test this out. The standard stuff like ranked matches, lobbies with multiple players, leaderboards, etc. are all present, but there's one system that was removed from Super Street Fighter 4 onwards. Over time, you would earn medals by clearing specific criteria in online matches, unlocking achievements as you go. Medals aren't going to matter for most players, but for those who lived and breathed online play back in 2009, I'm sure they would have cherished their little collection of accolades. It's important to note that Street Fighter 4's pre-2010s delay-based netcode wasn't ideal, but with the excitement surrounding the game's mere existence, I doubt those outside of the competitive crowd cared. Challenge mode is up next, and this is home to time attack, survival, and combo trials. The first 2 take the standard notions of beat levels as fast as possible, and beat levels without losing health and flip them on their head, as each mode is broken into gauntlets with unique modifiers. From regenerating meter to not being able to view health bars to being invisible, there's a lot of fun to be had here, but if you lose once, you have to go all the way back to the beginning, and the input reading AI would often kill my sanity when I was younger. Combo trials are far simpler however, aiming to teach players the ins and outs of every fighter in the game. What starts off as singular special moves becomes tricky combos with one-frame links, meaning there's a noticeable increase in difficulty as you progress. Training mode is what it says on the box, a way for you to practice whatever you want against a dummy opponent, but there are no learning materials to capitalize on. Despite Street Fighter 4 still somewhat existing within the fighting game zeitgeist we have today, it was released during a time where in-game hitbox viewers, detailed frame data displays, replay takeovers, and other features we now take for granted were never being thought about by developers. With that said, it's far from being poorly made, and it can be fun to mess around with the opponent, so I don't really have any strong opinions. Player data is where you can view personal statistics accumulated through long-time play, and gallery mode features cutscenes, promotional artwork, and pre-release development material. This too was removed from Super onwards, and I always hated that it was gone. Being able to take in all sorts of wonderful development imagery brings back so many great memories, and I always get a kick out of seeing concepts that never made their way into the final game. And that's all the content found within Street Fighter 4. At this point, you may think that all of this would get old after just about a week of playing, but there's a very important feature that I've yet to mention. A vast majority of what I've just demonstrated needs to be manually unlocked, including the character roster. If you're the type of person who wants everything unlocked from the get-go, I hate to burst your bubble, but there's no getting around it. You're forced to play arcade mode, survival, time trials, etc. over and over and over again to get everything. On a personal note, I didn't have internet access as a kid, so there was no chance of me looking up how to unlock every fighter. Some of them are pretty simple, like beating arcade mode with Ryu to access Sakura for example, but to unlock Akuma and Goken? Yeah, I never got to play as them until I could Google their unlock requirements. Mind you, all of this isn't a bad thing, but whenever I go to play Super or Ultra Street Fighter 4 on a new system, it's such a relief knowing that every fighter is immediately available. On the other hand, I've had to unlock these characters more times than I care to admit due to save file corruptions, playing on different consoles, etc., and it's always a pain in the butt. Overall, there's some great content to be found within Street Fighter 4, but the game lacks that X factor that'll keep even the most casual of players invested. Nonetheless, grinding out combo trials is a guilty pleasure of mine, and I would be lying if I said I haven't been entertained for over a decade by screwing around in training mode. Upon its highly anticipated console release in 2009, Street Fighter 4 was showered with so much praise that you could substitute it with water when bathing. Virtually all review outlets, both amateur and corporate, slapped that pretty box art with perfect scores, leading to a 94 on Metacritic. This makes vanilla Street Fighter 4 one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, and I can imagine how happy Capcom must have been when they heard the news. I could go on and on and on about specific review quotes and opinions, but they can easily be summarized by saying that literally every aspect of the game was beloved. Its sales figures were incredible too, instantly topping the charts in the UK as well as selling over 2 million copies worldwide in under 2 months. In case it wasn't clear by now, Street Fighter had reclaimed its throne within the collective consciousness of fighting game enthusiasts, but that's not to say everyone liked the game. There exists archived online discussions detailing how many die-hard fans disliked the 3D visuals, focus attacks, ultra combos, and even the newcomers, just to name a few. I'm sure we all know about the old game good, new game bad meme, and if you ever want to see how this applies in the real world, Street Fighter is the series to check out. As with all new fighting games, the hardcore crowd were running wild within the tournament space, and you can easily find 16-year-old tournament sets on YouTube. Players from all around the world were competing to be the best, with Street Fighter 4's run at EVO 2009 featuring over 1,000 entrants. The bracket culminated in an incredible set between Justin Wong and Daigo Umehara, and I recommend giving it a watch if you haven't seen it before. To recap, in under a year of its launch, Street Fighter 4 set the critical world on fire, sold more units than sliced bread, and eased geopolitical tensions, so it should come as no surprise that Capcom put the pedal to the metal. Super Street Fighter 4, a major title update, released just a year later, introducing new characters, modes, story content, and balance changes, before being followed by Arcade Edition and Ultra Street Fighter 4. Each version featured Vanilla's core mechanics but aimed to expand on them, providing consumers with better and more content. They reviewed and sold well too, with the hype train going full steam ahead. Hell, there was even a sub-series of Street Fighter 4 mobile games, and just like with their console counterparts, they're awesome. At the risk of sounding pretty corny, I believe that Street Fighter 4 was more than a fighting game. Like with Street Fighter 2, it expanded the genre to new heights and helped to pull it out of what's known as the quote-unquote FGC Dark Ages, a time in the early 2000s when interest in fighting games from the mainstream was at an all-time low, although there were still fantastic titles being released during this period. I couldn't find this during my research, but a long time ago I vividly remember watching a video where James Chen explained that the moment Street Fighter 4 released on consoles, swarms of new players started attending American locals and tournaments. The main local I attended in Australia was founded in 2009 directly for Street Fighter 4 players to improve, and Ultra still gets played there today. On a larger level, every major you can think of will have had Street Fighter 4 as one of their main games, and there were so many competitors with unique playstyles. From Prunko chugging Red Bull to Perfect Daigo with Seth, to Latif's dominating C-Viper run, to Snake Eyes making an amazing 1v5 comeback with Zangief, to Shan beating people silly with Gen, to Pepperdye's best-in-class Alfuerte, to Sako's insane Evil Ryu combos, to Nakoru's Guile, to Smug's Dudley, to Gandhi winning a set with his Day 1 Ryu, it was an incredible time to be a spectator. When my parents decided to finally invest in an internet connection, I became addicted to watching Street Fighter 4 videos on YouTube, with channels like Cross Counter, The Beast, Maximilian, Dupless, Desk, Snooch, etc. all fighting for control of my eyeballs. Seriously, I couldn't get enough of Street Fighter 4, and with how successful the game was at tournaments, neither could the diehards. Although the series in general introduces new mechanics for each numbered entry, Street Fighter 4's heartbeat can still be heard today, with Jury, Seth, and C-Viper returning in recent entries, with the former becoming one of the most popular modern fighting game characters. Perhaps I'm looking back on Street Fighter 4 with rose-tinted nostalgia goggles, but when I go back and watch high-level competition, the excitement is real. Man, what a time that was. From its humble origins as an arcade-exclusive fighter in 2008 to where we are today, I believe that Street Fighter 4 aged like a fine wine. Aside from the netcode being far from perfect, there aren't any substantial criticisms I can throw its way. If you're interested in trying the game out, Ultra is readily available on Steam and can easily run on potato PCs. Going back to vanilla specifically, no other fighting game gives me that rush of emotions I feel when watching that beautiful intro movie. I could go on for eons about all the great memories I have of playing the game when I was younger, but in the interest of time, I'll save it for now. The bottom line is that Street Fighter 4 is an incredibly fun time, one that I would recommend for fighting game fans of all skill levels. It's not too hard to pick it up and play with friends, and with how unique its roster is, there's a playstyle for everyone. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you and your time, and I hope you had fun. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.